Well, thank you to everybody for joining us today. You've got some of the Princeton teams on the screen here, so we can have a little bit of interaction. I want to congratulate you for doing half the battle, which is showing up. Today we're going to talk about mindset. We run across loan originators within Princeton and all over the country that they always want to go from 10 million to 20 million, 20 to 40, 40 to 80, and on and on. And few do it. But every year, everybody wants to double their business. But those few that do it, what is the difference? And that's what this series, this 4-part series is about. It's really, we've been able to work with people and train people to say, hey, you've got this ambitious goal. How do you get there? And what is it that leads to that level of success? And there's no secret answer to it, but I will say this, it starts with mindset. So showing up's half the battle, and then the second piece is getting your mindset correct. So for anybody that's just joining, I'm Rich Vidal, the CEO here at Princeton Mortgage. I'll share a quick story, and then I'm going to hand it over to Mark Gordon, who's our head trainer and coach here at Princeton Mortgage, to lead this on today. Years ago, about a decade, I'd set some really big career goals for myself, and I put myself in a position where I could go after them. And after about a year, I had no traction. I did everything right. I read the books, I'd set my goals, I'd gotten ready, and it was overwhelming me. And there was this sense of despair. And my wife, Sarah's on this call today, so I'm going to be a little embarrassed sharing this. But I was going home every night, showing up and complaining. And I was frustrated, and I couldn't understand it. This person and that person and the market, and I was always complaining. I said, enough. Enough, Rich. Either shut up and get the job done or quit and do something else. And it was exactly what I needed to hear at that moment, which was all of the complaining that I did was my mindset of putting myself in a victim position where I was railing against things that were outside of my control. And so that was a pivotal moment, both my life and my career, that led to years of learning about what we're going to talk about today, which is we do not control what happens to us, right? And in the mortgage business, we're never as good as we think, and we're never as bad as we think. Our job is to navigate market cycles. But we all want to believe we can just have this magical plan and we do this, and if we just keep doing this, it'll work. The player, which is what we're going to talk about today, understands that we don't control what happens to us, but what we can control is our mindset and how we respond to those things. And so as we set out here in 2024, each of us is dealing with each of our unique parts of our marketplace and our goals and what we want to do. And so the question becomes, do we have the right mindset as we set our goals to confront those realities and respond to them in a way where we can move towards our goals? Or are we going to be at the consequence of things that are outside of our control? So really important thing. I thank you for being here today. This is part of our goal to continue to share among the industry with people the things that we've seen succeed so we can all get out there and thrive in 24. So with that, Mark Gordon, please take us away.
Thank you, Rich. I appreciate it so much. So I come with props because anytime you're going to do a presentation, you want to have a little bit of props. This is my favorite prop for this specific training that we're going to do today. So you guys can see here, nothing special about this one. Usually I like to go with a raffle that's a little bit more red, but here's one we had today. So I have a question for you guys who are watching. Why did the apple drop? Do you have any guesses for why the apple dropped? Some of you guys have been through this training before, so maybe you don't want to guess. Well, one of the guesses, I do this training quite a bit. We have two alternative hypotheses. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, the answer is obvious, it's gravity, that's one possible explanation. If you're sitting there and you're watching this and you're saying, the answer is, I dropped it, that's also the truth. And so what we're going to talk about today is that all things that happen, right, happen along two equal vectors, right? Now, that doesn't mean they're equally in terms of like which percentage of it. We'll talk about that in a minute. Dan, I don't know if you want to show get the presentation part of this going so those guys can see it. So those two vectors, if you can go ahead to that slide, Dan. Sorry, I should have given you the cue a little bit earlier. The two vectors that we have are things that we control and things that we don't control. Okay. And so if you set gravity, right, you're focused on the element of this that we actually do not have control over. Dan, you want to go ahead a couple more slides? Or is it stuck? I've only seen the Propel slide. Where do you guys see it?
Just Propel.
Just Propel.
All right. Well, hopefully we can get that up. That's a little too, there you go. Look, look at this, almost like we're repaired. Things you can control and things that you can't control, right? And so everything happens along those vectors. In this case, it's like a 50-50, right? If you believe that gravity is the reason this apple falls, well, then the fact that I'm holding it here and it's not falling sort of becomes a miracle, right? Because then what we're really saying is, hey, gravity should always make all things fall, but we know that that's not the case. And so we have two factors of this, right? Well, in all of the things that happen to us in this world, we have those things on those two vectors, but we have a choice. So we can focus on things we can control or the things that we can't control. Now, here's a question for you. If you're a gravity person, or in general in your life, you're focused on the answers you can't control, why would anybody do that? Why would we disempower ourselves and focus on the things that we can't control? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to get to some of those answers, okay? So I'm going to ask you guys another question. Have you guys, and on this, by the way, whether you've been through one of these trainings before or not, please feel free to answer along. Have you guys ever been late for a meeting? Ignacio already looks guilty. Have you guys ever been late for a meeting? Of course, right? Maybe you've been late for a meeting. Somebody else has been late for a meeting. You've seen people late for a meeting. Well, when we ask people if they're late for a meeting, what are some of the answers we get, right? You'll get somebody to say, hey, I was stuck in traffic, right? Another answer says, oh, I was stuck in another meeting. Well, if you were stuck in another meeting, what does that exactly look like? Does that mean that somebody was like holding you there and keeping you in that meeting and preventing you from leaving? Did somebody my size have you in a bear hug and they just wouldn't let you get out? Well, we choose to have a language around those things that makes us not take responsibility, right? It makes us not take, we didn't have the ability to respond. We take that power away from ourselves in those moments, right? And so that's what we call a victim mindset, right? We're going to get into the different levels of this in a minute, some different things that are those scenarios. We do that because it feels so good to not have to take responsibility for those things. If you say you got stuck in traffic, that means there was nothing that you could do differently that would have resulted in you being on time. If you say I got stuck in the other meeting, you take away all the power and say, hey, I'm innocent. I'm innocent. The problem is that innocence equals impotence, meaning that if you aren't part of the problem, you cannot possibly be part of the solution. If it's not my fault, if it's not your fault, then you can't do anything to fix it. And what's more than that then is that if it's not your fault, you're signaling to everybody else that they should not look to you as to be part of the solution. And that becomes a huge problem for us in our careers as loan officers. So I'm going to play a little clip right now. And I think this really very specifically, in a very humorous way, identifies what we're talking about right now. Dan, can you go ahead and play the clip?
Whoa, that's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are two people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something? I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, there's not enough left to do, is it?
So let me ask you guys, as we go back to the presentation part of this. Are those people, is the reason those people are stuck on the escalator because the escalator broke? A little bit. You could make that argument, right? If you were putting it on the vector that we talked about earlier, it's 1% or less that the escalator broke, and 99% of those people choosing to stay on the escalator. Now I'm going to share.
Mark, I couldn't help while I'm watching that. Just think about the escalator as the Fed, right? And everybody's obsession in the industry. What is the Fed going to do? What's happening? What are they going to say? What's going on? The obsession on the Fed is the escalator.
Yeah, 100%, right? We're focusing on something that we can't control, right? They can't control the escalator broke. But by the way, I have the privilege of coaching lots of realtors and loan officers. And everybody thinks that the things they're up against are unique and special and only happening to them. For me, as somebody who's experienced helping people overcome those obstacles, what it looks like to me, and I don't always say this to somebody because sometimes it's a little bit offensive and they might get mad at me. It seems to me like they're stuck on an escalator. I watch people choose to remain stuck, remain in pain, remain in a situation where they're blaming things outside their control, where all they would have to do is put the same amount of effort in it takes to get off the escalator, to walk up the stairs. Sometimes it's so easy, you could just turn around and walk down the stairs to get off the escalator, right? So easy. But they think that they're stuck. They choose to stay stuck. They say, well, why do we do that, right? Well, because there's a fear of saying that if I'm the one in control, if I'm the one who has the ability, we talk about responsibility, the ability to respond. If I have that, right, then all of a sudden now, all of my problems are on me. And that's uncomfortable for so many people. It's an uncomfortable place to sit in, right? For me, I had a moment when I first started out in the mortgage business. I was a loan officer and that went well. I became a manager. As a manager, you're supposed to have 8 people on your team. Well, I only had 4 because I had just gotten started. And one of them was a guy I recruited who was crushing it. Came out of the gate swinging, right? And but it wasn't because I was this amazing manager. He was really good. He was really motivated. If the average person was selling 1.5 loans a week, he was selling 6. Okay. And I bring this up because when my manager said, hey, Mark, great job, I was like, oh, not really. Kevin's the one, selling the 6 loans. He looked at me and he said, I was 22 years old. He said, when it's good, it's you. When it's bad, it's you. Right. And that moment was transformational for me. And the reason for that was that it took me like months of processing that, by the way, to let it all really sink in, what that meant. When it's good, it's you. When it's bad, it's you. What does that really mean? And what he was saying to me is like, hey, when it's bad, you can't look around and look for things that are outside of your control. If Kevin quits next week and your team goes down the bottom, you can't say, well, you're only struggling because Kevin quit, right? You got to focus on the elements that you can control. You got to focus on the fact, why did Kevin quit? Could you have kept Kevin there? Who else could you hire? How could you build your team faster? At the same time, when it's going well, it's because of all those things you did. And by the way, even if it's only 10% within your control, focusing on that 10% is how you're going to learn to progress and grow your business. And so if you aren't obsessed with the piece of the variable that's within your control, both before, during, and after the fact, it becomes very difficult to learn from both your successes and your failures, right? So when things aren't going your way, you don't blame yourself. Are you going to learn from your past mistakes? I'll tell you another quick story. One of the things that connected Rich and I when I had the interview with him back 6 years ago, well, he said, hey, if you go back and run your business again, what would you do differently? And my answer is everything, right? Once I have all of the information right now, the successes or failures of that business, I would go back and do it all differently. As a player, I now know things I didn't know before, and all of the things that didn't go well are my fault, right? That radical responsibility becomes freedom, right? It becomes the ability to take control of your life and to push those things through, right? So start thinking about, where am I stuck on the escalator? We're going to come back to that in a minute. So I want to kind of point out some other instances in your life where you'll feel very clearly that people have a player's mindset or a victim's mindset. Hopefully, I have three little girls. I'm sure a lot of you guys have kids. When your kids spill something in your house and you ask them, what happened? Tommy, what happened? What do your kids say? Do they say, Mom, Dad, I spilled the milk? No. They say it spilled, like it was magical, like it spontaneously spilled over, right? When a toy breaks in your house and you go to your kids, oh my God, Tommy, what happened? They go, I broke the toy. No, they go, it broke. Or if there's somebody else in your house or you have a dog or anything else, it was that person did it or that other thing did it, right? They don't want to take responsibility, right? Innocence feels good, but it gets us in so much trouble in our jobs. I'm going to talk specifically about how this costs us as loan officers and how it teaches people not to trust us, which is the most powerful example, okay? So by the way, at work, right? When you talk to your processor, if a loan didn't go through and they start blaming everything that's outside of their control. It's the underwriter that made a mistake. It's the borrower won't get me the documents. The LOA didn't, right? What is that processor teaching you? They're teaching you that you can't trust that person to get the job done, because if it's not their fault, then they can't be part of the solution. So you know what happens the next time your file gets stuck? You don't even call your processor. You got to go find the person in your organization who has the power to help fix your thing. Well, you know what happens then when, by the way, when it comes time to say who should we keep in a company, who we shouldn't? Well, the people who can't fix the problems, they don't have, you don't have a use for those people, right? By the way, you probably have somebody within your organization who's constantly the person you go to fix problems, right? That person makes themselves valuable. Say, even if it wasn't their fault, if they choose to respond and fix it, then they're the ones they can control. Now, here's where it really matters for you. Say, well, listen, how many of you guys have ever said, it's not my job? It's not my job. Fred said it, right? Everyone's probably had that moment in their lives. Well, by the way, that might feel good in that moment. But if you're the person in pain, it's your problem, and your job is to relieve your pain and fix your problems, right? And so if you want to succeed, then when you're in pain, you have to choose to respond. So let's focus on some other areas where this might be happening in your life. Your friends and family, the people you spend time with, can set you up for failure with this stuff. So like Rich says, you come home and you come home to Sarah and you complain. You say, oh, this thing happened, that thing happened, this thing happened. Well, what does Sarah do if she wants to be an enabler? And what we call them is drug dealers here at Princeton. She wants to be a drug dealer, right? The drug of innocence. She goes, oh my God, what did he do to you? What did he do? Oh my God, who did that? Who can we blame, right? Start focusing on all those different things. Here's some other ones, right? What should he have done differently? What is he going to do to fix it, right? And Rich goes, I don't know, but it's not my fault. It feels so good. By the way, man, Sarah is such a good friend to me. She's such a good wife. She makes me feel so good when I come home and complain about these things. Well, Rich is looking for a drug and Sarah's acting like a drug dealer, right? Now, most people during life behave this way, by the way, because the alternative to this is you might have less friends. Because let me explain to you what happens when someone does those things to me. This happened. My mom got it her last job. She'd come home. My boss is so mean to me. They don't include me in any of the meetings. And I would say, well, Mom, what do you think the reason is for that? What message are you sending them that they don't think you would have value in those meetings? You're saying it's my fault? Yes, I am. Now, that might not be the whole story. In fact, that might only be 10% of the story. Maybe there's other reasons why my mom wasn't allowed in those meetings or felt like she was being treated unfairly. But if even 10% of it was her fault, my guess, by the way, is it's probably significantly more than that, right? Usually your boss has one goal is to get the ball over the goal line, accomplish the goals. If they think you're the best person for it, they'll probably recognize that. It's usually not personal when we think it is. But even if it's 10% her fault, what use is it to worry about the other 90%, right? It does not serve that person. And so if we want to be leaders and we want to grow in our careers, and by the way, as Rich said, showing up here is half the battle. We need to surround ourselves with people who will not deal us those drugs. The reason we pay for coaching or get coaching in general is we want someone to tell us when we're feeding ourselves that BS, right? When we're looking for that drug. And someone says, well, here's what you're going to do about it. Here's what you can do to fix the problem. And by the way, we get that power back. That's what this is all about, okay? So here are some questions you can ask somebody when they're complaining. How did you contribute to the problem? Oh, I didn't do anything, they might say. It's like, okay, probably not true. I've never really had a problem where I didn't do anything to contribute to it. You might have to go back a little bit far, but usually we're contributing. Usually it's all my fault, to be honest, once you think about it. What can you do now? If you're the one suffering, what actions can you take to move the ball forward? And what can you learn from it? So Rich mentioned the Fed. Here are just some other areas I've seen in my career loan officers do things that kind of blow my mind where they're just like very stuck on an escalator, okay? You see it all the time. When I was in the call center, we would have loan officers that get 30 leads a week. Leads were assigned at random. And every week you have people in the call center selling 3.5, 4 loans a week. And every week you have people selling 1 or 0. And the people selling 1 or 0 would go, my leads stink. It's the leads. I got the bad leads. Every week you got the bad leads? Every week that happened to you? How come every morning when I see so-and-so come in, they're making more phone calls? They're more excited in their first 15 seconds on the phone. They're overcoming objections. They're bringing enthusiasm. They're excited about the job, but suddenly their leads are always good. They love the leads, right? And by the way, once that happens, it starts to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once you believe you start selling those leads, all of a sudden every lead looks good, right? Conversely, if you're like, my lead stunk last week, well, what happens when the first person hangs up on you on Monday morning? The lead stink again this week. And then that becomes your self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And that becomes the thing that you deal with. So that's just one example, right? But we see here, oh, realtors. I have loan officers who complain to me about real. I hate realtors. Find another job. I don't know what to say to you guys. Like, it's nothing. I hate realtors. All the realtors are bad? Or maybe the only realtors that want to work with you are the ones that are kind of a pain in the butt. Maybe the message and the activities that you're putting out there and the actions you're putting out there and your vibe is attracting realtors who stink. I got to tell you, some of my friends are realtors. Some of my best friends are realtors. Some of those people I know, the people I know are realtors, right? There are really cool, by the way, just like in every other profession, there are realtors that are great and realtors that aren't. If your realtors all stink, it's you. And if you feel attacked when I say that, great. Because by the way, if it's your fault, good news, you can do something about it. The thing you can't do about it is decide you don't want to work with realtors anymore because this is the profession you chose. So you have to figure out how you're going to find and attract and get to work with the realtors that you want to spend your life with and bring those people into it. Every problem that you're having in your business right now, which is the reason that you're not getting to your goals, is partly within your control. Now, is this year harder than 2021? Of course. We're not talking about ignoring reality here, right? There are two vectors. There are things that are outside of our control. All I'm saying is spending more than 13 seconds worrying about any of that stuff is completely useless. All of us would be better served by spending far more time focused on the things that we can control. And people often say to me, oh, I didn't know that. When I go into coaching, like, thank you so much. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Well, here's the thing, guys. The teachers for these things can only emerge when the student is ready. And so unless you have that player's mindset and you're going out there and actively seeking new information that gives you the power back, that allows you to be the difference in your business, you will not see those things, right? So you guys showed up today if you're on this call. That's a good sign to me that you're willing to grow and have that player's mindset. But I encourage you guys, again, spend the time today, this week, figuring out where are you stuck on escalators. And by the way, if you need help figuring that out, give me a call, right? Happy to meet with anybody about that and help them discover that for themselves. Because by the way, once you've been doing this as long as I have, it's pretty obvious. Those conversations are short and they're easy. And whatever unique problems you think you're having in your business, they're not. They're not that unique, right? The things that you need to do to overcome them for your plan, your personality, they may be a little bit more unique. But the first step is realizing that this is within my control. Most of you guys probably set goals for this year. Today is the 16th. How many of you guys set a New Year's resolution you've already forgotten about or given up on? Right? We do this all the time. And by the way, we let ourselves off the hook. We blame the environment and the world. I'm at the effect of these things, that victim mindset. We want to shift into that player's mindset. So I'll just share with you guys this. And again, I want to say it to you again so you can hear it. Acting with innocence, saying it's not my fault. I'm stuck in the meeting. You're not stuck in the meeting. You chose to stay. You chose to say to me, well, my boss was in there. I could have gotten in trouble if I left. Yes. So you chose to stay. Oh, but like I had a client in the client meeting. I couldn't get off the phone. No, you chose to stay. I know this, by the way, because once you make this commitment, you will see opportunities everywhere in your life to come through on your commitments. I was the person who was always stuck on a phone call with a buyer, always stuck on a phone call with a realtor. Now, when I had a 3 o'clock appointment, if it's 2:20 and I have a 3 o'clock appointment, the first thing I say is, just so you know, I have a hard stop at 3 p.m. I never got stuck in another call again. You let the other person know right away, you can take that action right away. People now will make sure they'll remind you at 2:59, hey, don't you have that call coming up? It's magical, right? Small behavioral changes that you can make everywhere in your life to help you come through on your commitments. Here's the last thing I want to remind you guys of before I conclude it. We teach everyone not to trust us. So if your buyer calls you and says, hey, why is my file stuck? And it feels good to blame the underwriter or Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, you're teaching that person that you are impotent, that you cannot make a difference, that they should call your manager or somebody else and go around you. They will not use you again. When you tell your realtor, it's not my fault. Cool, well, then there's nothing you can do about it, which means next time I have to use a different loan officer at a different company. Because there was nothing else you could do, and this still happened. Right? When you own it and you say, hey, I apologize. Here's what we're going to do to fix it. Here's what I'm going to do to make sure this never happens again. That is you having a player's attitude and making sure that person knows that you are the CEO of your file and they can trust you when things do go wrong, which everyone can accept that things will go wrong. But they have to know that you will move heaven and earth to get that thing fixed and that you have the power to do something about it. The minute that you say to somebody else, it's not my fault, what you're really saying to you is, I can't depend on you for those things anymore. And if you make that, if you realize you're making that announcement, every time you take the easy way out, the cowardly way out, and say, it's not my fault, you're teaching people not to trust you. Here's the thing, every time you do the brave, strong thing and own something, even when it's only 1 or 2% within your control, maybe it's 98% outside your control, but you own it. By the way, you become a little bit more fearless, a little bit stronger, a little bit more confident. And by the way, you start attracting the other people in the world that are like that. And those are the realtor partners that I want to work with, right? Those are the borrowers that I want to work with, people that are like, man, I want somebody who's in control. I want to attract those people. Those people don't whine. They get it. And you attract those people by behavior. So I'll turn it over to anybody who has questions for the group, and we can circle through any of those things. And then I'll circle back to anything else. What questions do you guys have about the material?
Hey, Mark, I had a quick question.
Sure.
This is probably one of my favorite things that you talk about, by the way. Like I had never until the last year put things in this perspective. So I understand that it starts with mindset, right? And mindset is, am I going to be a player? Am I going to be a victim? Positive, negative? And mindset is important because what you focus on essentially is going to expand. I think you use that line, meaning if I walk in grouchy into the office and the world's coming to an end and the business is awful, and then I'm going to attract those people that feel the same way, and it becomes a self-serving prophecy has spiraled down. And in the same token, if I'm positive, if I look at the bright side of the business, then I'm going to attract realtor partners and people into my life that feel the same way, and we're going to lift each other up, right? I believe relationships either lift you up or lift you down. So when we talk about what you focus on expands, it's important, right? Do you want to be lifted up? Do you want to be lifted down? Then taking it a step further, if I think about the top 10 originators in the country, right, today. They tend to be pretty positive, right? They have a player's mindset, and it comes through crystal clear. Then if I think about, and I'm making up numbers at this point, if I think about the bottom 10% is probably the opposite, right? Like it's an awful environment, it's a horrible time to buy a house, it's a horrible time to be in the business, yada yada. Then that's what they're going to attract. Then I think about people like me, the other 80%, or maybe it's 70%, and we're in the middle, right? We're in the middle where I want to have a player's mindset. I want to be positive, but some days are just tough, and I just get my teeth kicked in, Mark. And I know that ultimately the way that I look at it is I got to have more good days than I have bad days. But for people that are in that environment, knowing the importance of making sure you stay positive, that you become a player, how would you recommend, what activities, what can I do on a daily basis to help me start out the day right, to help me correct when I can like self-identify that, hey, I'm going down the wrong hole here. Is it reading? Is it like just trusted advisors that I have around me? Is it a combination of like, what would you say to that 80% of the population that, that they want to be a player, but life happens, right? Life happens. And how do you make sure that when life happens, you don't get pulled down?
Well, so you brought up a few different things there I want to touch on, but so let's start with the thing you brought up at the very end there. For me, this is not, when you talk about being positive, I'm not talking about walking around like the sun is shining when it's raining, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about being delusional. In fact, one of our sayings here is the team that sees reality the best wins. And so I'm not talking about ignoring negative things. What I'm actually saying to you is when you have that bad day, you have to realize that is part of your process. A lot of it starts with expectations, right? If you want to meet the most depressed person in the world, meet somebody who thinks every day is going to be the best day of their life. And then when it's only the second best day of their life, feels let down every day, right? And so if you go out there with unrealistic expectations, you're going to feel that way. The reality is, as a mortgage loan officer, you can be really successful. And you're going to close in this environment 5, 6, 7 loans a month. Means you're going to have a lot of days where nothing good happens, where you're going through your process and you're not getting a specific win. In fact, that's why loan officers can make the money they do. It's hard. The job is hard. You have to get up every single day and do the activities without any sort of expectation for the results. And so one of the things that we're actually doing a training on next week with our internal team here is saying, hey, when we put those time blocks in our calendar, right? It's not that we're blocking that time. It's that we're depositing. We're putting in a deposit on that time, on the expectation of results, meaning that each phone call is going to be worth $50 to us over the long haul. And by the way, that doesn't mean you can make 10 phone calls in a row where you get nothing out of it, but the 11th phone call makes you $550. I really saw actually a Grant Cardone clip where he was teaching his daughter about cold calling. And he said, how much money did you make on that call? And she's like, nothing. And he's like, well, but you just made 14 calls. You made one sale. It's like, no, you didn't make $5,000 on the one call. You split up that $5,000 over the 14 calls, right? And so having proper expectations of, hey, it's not actually about having a good day today. It's about feeling good about working my process today, regardless of the outcome. And so we need to separate our process from the results in order to keep that mentality going forward. You also talked about what we focus on expands. And anybody here who's ever played golf knows that if you say, don't hit it in the bunker as you're hitting your shot, where's the ball going to go in the bunker? I have a great story about this when I was in high school and I was the kicker. And we had a guy who was actually went and played D1, played in the NFL. His name was Carlos Perez, and their team all week long. My coach said, don't kick it to Carlos. I'm like, cool. Every time in practice, I hit it away from Carlos. I get up, I kick the ball, and I swear there was a magnet to Carlos. They go there because our brains don't know the difference between don't and do. They just know Carlos, 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 or bunker, 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 and that ball goes right to them, right? And so we wake up every day and say, don't be negative, right? Don't look for those things. Well, you know what happens is our brains, the RAS in our brains, which you can get to the science at a different time, doesn't hear that. We focus on the negative, right? And so actually what we're going to say is today, we're going to get up, I'm going to commit to my process. I'm going to commit to being a person of integrity, which means doing the things that I said I was going to do. And regardless of the outcomes, I'm going to feel really good about that if I come through on my commitments to myself. You do that every day. And man, does that snowball start to grow, right? And so it's not, when I say being positive, we're not talking about ignoring reality. What we're talking about is creating an environment where the day can't derail me. Where if I get one bad phone call at 9:45, my process falls apart. And that's what happens to loan officers every day. I see it. I had all these intentions today, but I woke up and I got a bad email at 8:45, and I sat there and stared at my computer angry about it for 6 hours instead of making my calls. This happens, right? And by the way, we start doing only the urgent work, and we start ignoring all the important but non-urgent work. And by the way, that's the work that makes us the money. So I really appreciate those questions. Rich, did you have something you wanted to add?
I think we had one. I think we had some come in, right, Court?
Yeah, we have one question that came in from the chat, and if anyone else has any other questions, you can utilize the chat, and it will come only to the hosts and the panelists who are Princeton Mortgage team members. So you don't need to, your name will still stay anonymous. But this one says, what would you say to those who are inclined to take responsibility and accountability for things they cannot control, such as market conditions, etc.?
Oh, you mean the crystal ball loan officers? Well, that's what I call people, right? Or by the way, when we have these gurus in the mortgage industry who tell you, don't lock, float, rates are going to go down. I promise you, by the way, if anybody knew that information, they wouldn't have to spend their time on social media telling you which way the rates are going to go. They would be billionaires, right? Because they would know the answers to where the market is going, right? And so, right, here's the risk. This is about building trust with yourself and with others. That's what this whole process is about, player versus victim mindset. So, by the way, where it's just as easy to lose trust, if you say to somebody, it's not my fault, promising that you have the answers or that you can come up with things or handle things and guarantee things that are outside your control will break those promises as well. I learned this the hard way in my career early on. right? Early on in the call center, right? I'd be like, oh, don't worry, we're definitely going to get your loan closed by the end of the month. And I would literally do everything I could know how to do to get this loan closed by the end of the month. And there were things that were outside my control. The borrower would have an issue with their job. The underwriter would go on vacation. There's a million things, right? And so what you learn to do is not make commitments that you can't make, right? And by the way, this is just small language things, right? So talking about, hey, I'm going to do whatever's within my control to get your loan closed by the end of the month. And if anything else comes up, I will let you know immediately so we can prepare, right? I am never going to guarantee something to somebody that's outside of my control. So if someone says to you, will you be there at 11 o'clock? I will say, yes, I'm going to be there at 11 o'clock as long as something completely unexpected doesn't happen, right? And you may think that's a little bit overkill or we're being a little bit too careful in our commitments. I don't think so. I want someone to know that when I say something, it's absolutely going to happen. And so if there's something that's outside my control, I want to make sure I'm very careful with my commitments. You see this at work all the time where someone will go, I will get the product done by Friday. But what they need something from a different department on Thursday to make sure that happens. Well, now all of a sudden on Thursday, that person goes on vacation. On Friday, they go, hey, I don't have it. The person was counting on you to do it. Like, what do you mean you don't have it? Yeah, Sally and the other department didn't get me the thing I needed. I don't care about that. You told me you were going to get it for me. You promised you was going to be here today. And now you're acting like it's somebody else's fault. I can never trust you again, right? Now, if that same person said, I will get this to you on Friday, as long as Sally in HR gets me my thing on Thursday. And then on Thursday at 3:01, when you realize that Sally didn't get it to you by the deadline, you call that person and go, I just wanted to give you a heads up. We may not have the thing tomorrow because I'm still waiting on the thing from Sally. Now you're a person of the highest integrity, whether you deliver the product on Friday or not. And so, yes, the worst thing you can do is guarantee things that you're not in control over. And the second worst thing you can do when things go wrong is blame other people. These all fit into that same box. And so taking radical responsibility doesn't mean writing checks you can't cash, right? As an expression, right? What it means is being very specific about what people can expect from you and guaranteeing that if and when you need to, you should be coming through on 90% of your commitments and on the other 10% renegotiating them the minute you realize, right? I have people who used to work for me and they would call me, they would call me at 9:01 and tell me they were going to be a half hour late to work when they were supposed to be there at 9 o'clock. And I would ask them, when did you realize you were going to be late? And the answer is the minute they woke up and realized they'd overslept by 45 minutes. But they waited till 9:01 to tell me. Well, if we had a 9 a.m. meeting, you just caused, I didn't have any time to prepare, reutilize this time. You wasted my time. I can't trust you. If you roll out of bed at 8:01 and you're like, I overslept by 45 minutes, Mark, I'm sorry, I'm going to miss the 9 a.m. I need you to adjust. I'm still mad about it, but now I can reutilize that time and I understand that life happens. So coming through on our commitments 90% of the time and negotiating those commitments on the other 10% as soon as they happen. You know what our statistics, by the way, show? People come through on their commitments less than half the time. And we live in these negotiated truces with everybody in our lives. Yeah, I'll be there at 5 o'clock. They show up at 5:05. Yeah, I'll go to the movies this weekend. They cancel at you on the last minute, right? Yeah, I'll send you. Yep. Yes, I'll send you the questions for the presentation. We didn't get them, right? That's one that happened for this meeting today. So those things happen all the time. Do you want to be in a relationship with somebody where they get called out for that? Where you go, hey man, I'm learning I can't trust you because you told me you were going to send me the questions for the meeting last night. I didn't get them. Right? Or do you want to live in a negotiation and say, hey, I don't want you to call me out on my stuff, so I won't call you out on yours. Those are really unhealthy relationships. They allow you to stay mediocre. If you want exceptional results, you have to enter into relationships where you want that sort of accountability and with other people, and you want to hold yourself to that standard. So I hope that answers that question. Do you have any other?
I'd like to add a little bit onto that because I think, at Princeton, we have this thing called the Princeton Promise, where if any borrower is unhappy for any reason, they click a button and we'll give them $1,000. And there's a whole story behind that, but that was really our accountability to our borrowers that we will deliver an effortless experience. And I get involved in every single time a borrower requests it. 7 out of 10 times, it's because somebody on our team committed something to the borrower that we didn't fulfill. All of the time, we committed to something that we couldn't control. And so I'm going back to the question, like what happens when we take responsibility for things that we can't control? The answer is you get yourself in trouble. So I'll give a specific example recently. And it's so tempting to want to tell people what they want to hear. And it's always, the moving truck, they're having a baby, there's all that stuff going on. We will have the appraisal by Thursday. We don't control the snowstorm, car breaks down, their cell phone, there's all of these things are outside of our control. I will have the appraisal by Thursday. Okay. Well, we don't get the appraisal by Thursday. And the loan officer doesn't follow up with the borrower to let them know. It goes till Friday end of day, and now the borrower is chasing the loan officer. The loan officer feels bad because they're like, oh, I committed to something and I didn't follow up and I forgot it. Princeton promise. To Mark's point, I expect to get the appraisal on Thursday. I can't guarantee it, but I can commit to you by the end of the day, Thursday, I will give you an update on where we stand. And if we don't get in on Thursday, here's what the implications are that and what we need to do from there. We are professionals. And so part of professionals, especially in this business right now, it's like the last 2 years, in 2022, everybody had to remember prospecting and making your phone calls and sales again, because in 2021, we didn't have to sell. How do you cut through that noise? How do you attract realtors? How do you have a realtor say, you should really call Sam? The answer is you're dependable professional. And so it's not taking responsibility for things that you can't control. It's how you respond to those types of situations. And so just remember that and by the way, the borrowers, they never claimed the Princeton promise when it was hard or things got screwed up. If we communicated, if we kept in flow with them, if we did what we said we're going to do, 7 out of 10 times, the borrower says, I am unhappy. I want the $1,000 because we said we made a commitment that we didn't fulfill. And so it becomes this toxic residue and you never even know about it. Mark talked about personal relationships. If anybody's ever thrown a party and you get 20 RSVPs and 10 people cancel at the last minute, it's all that type of stuff just leaves this toxic residue. And as a professional, we're trying to cut through the noise and talk to realtors that are getting called from 10 different loan officers, all this type of stuff. It's the little decisions that we make with every single encounter we have where we build ourselves up as the professional that can be relied on.
Any other questions that came through from the group?
None that came through in the chat thus far. So if anyone else has any other questions, would love to hear them. You can just type them in the chat.
So Mark, I did have one more question, and I apologize since I'm the individual that was supposed to send you a list yesterday. And it kind of ties to the question that we had somebody from the audience, ties to my original question, and I still don't know that I could articulate it to a loan officer properly. How do I change my mindset? Like, how do I change? Sometimes we can go ahead and identify like, oh man, maybe I'm bringing people down versus bringing them up, or so like how can somebody change? And what specifically would you recommend? Like if it's to the individual and that asks the question, if they have a tendency to take responsibility for things that they shouldn't, like I get it, saying stop, don't do it. That's easier said than done, right? Like, can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So yeah, I would love to. Think it's a great question. And I will just share this. I'll start by saying it this way. I've had a really hard time changing behavior in people as a coach, right? People are very ambitious about their behaviors they want to change. And usually that's a very slow process. I would have to say we've had far more success working with people to change their mindset. And there's a couple of very quick things. The first thing you can do is enter into relationships or surround yourself with people who already have that mindset, because it's contagious. Mindset is incredibly contagious. So if you're on a group text to people and those people are complaining about stuff in your neighborhood all the time, get off the text chain. It doesn't serve you. Conversely, if you're with a group of people who are sending out verses from the Bible that are inspiring every morning, or different quotes that are being leaders something, that's an amazing gift to be in a group of people like that. That difference in your phone when you wake up in the morning and those texts come through will absolutely change your mindset. Making a decision to enter into relationships with people where you want that accountability is very simply, I went to the people in my life, my wife, my close friends, my family, and by the way, I gave them surveys. I asked them to fill out candid information about me to tell me all the things about me that they didn't like, or the things that wanted that feedback so badly. And by the way, that first time you get feedback like that, man, it hurts. It's like getting into a cold tub, an ice bath, right? Like it's bad. It hurts. By the way, the second time hurts way less. Third time doesn't hurt at all. And then all of a sudden, by the way, you have all this feedback that tells you how people actually see you. Good news. You get to be a player. You get to make changes.
Mhm.
And so I would start by going to people that you spend the most amount of time with, people in your house, the people that are your best friends, and go, hey, one of my commitments to myself for this year is to have a player's mindset. Explain to them what it means, right? Ask them, hey, if you hear me complaining about things that are outside of my control, I want you to stop me. I want you to tell me. By the way, would it be okay if I did the same thing for you?
Oh, don't do that.
Most people, by the way, will say yes, and then we'll see what happens when you get there.
Not in your house. Don't do it.
Well, Rich, you may have a different situation. I've committed to this in my life. And by the way, for the most part, it's been great for me.
Yeah.
Right? Even if in the moment you get pushed back. So I know we're a little bit over on time and I want to wrap this up, but guys, I hope that answers your question, Nate. Change who you're with and change the framework of your relationship with those people. If you have people in your life, I don't care if they're your mom, your dad, your sister, your uncles there, find a way to spend less time or engage with them less on those things. Stop being their drug dealer. If they complain to you and you don't want to be a player in that situation, just say nothing and walk away from it. Being able to identify it in other people will be the first thing you can do to start stopping yourself from doing it. And it's a process. You're not going to be perfect. You will have times where you slip into that mindset. But by entering into a world where you don't verbalize the same way, or you're thinking about it because you've made those agreements with people, the changes happen pretty quickly. And that's why we see, even with, when I have a new loan officer that joins my team, if they have those habits in week 1, 2, and 3, by 3 months, we don't have to talk about it anymore. It just goes away. Because if you start complaining and no one's listening, or they move on to what you can control, you stop complaining. And so, you want to surround yourself with those types of people. Well, guys, I really appreciate everybody coming. Where are you stuck on the escalator is the one thing I'll ask yourself. And by the way, what can you do to walk off of it? It's often as easy as that. Rich, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for attending today. It was a pleasure to be able to do it. Next week, we're going to roll into same time, same place, what it means to be a go-giver. And as we try to cut through this noise of prospect, make more phone calls, how do we create value and attract people to want to work with us? So thank you for being here. I hope you have a great week. See you, everybody.